My Brother Martin. A Sister Remembers Growing Up with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by Christine King Farris, his sister. Illustrated by Chris Sontepiet. And Chris illustrated what his sister looked like when she was young. A quote from Dr. King. I have a dream that one day little black boys and little black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. And Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke that on August 28, 1963. My Brother Martin. So this is a book or a story about his life when he was a child. And as I'm reading, think about questions you have. What do you wonder? What would you like to ask Dr. King as I'm reading these stories? Or maybe just his sister, Christine, if you could. Here she is as an adult, and she says, gather around and listen as I share childhood memories of my brother, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I am his older sister, and I've known him longer than anyone else. I knew him long before the speeches he gave and the marches he led and the prizes he won. I even knew him before he first dreamed the dream that would change the world. So as I read the story, think about questions you have and notice the pictures. The pictures show where he grew up when he was a child, and they are true depictions. They could actually be pictures, except that they don't have the people. So this wallpaper is still in his childhood home if you wanted to visit it. That is still in Atlanta and can be visited. Here is the story. We were born in the same room, my brother Martin and I. I was an early baby, born sooner than expected. Mother dear, their mom, and Daddy placed me in the chiffon robe drawer that stood in the corner of their upstairs bedroom. I got a crib a few days afterward. A year and a half later, Martin spent his first night in that hand-me-down crib, in the very same room. The house where we were born belonged to Mother dear's parents, our grandparents, the Reverend and Mrs. A.D. Williams. We lived there with them and our Aunt Ida, our grandmother's sister. And not long after my brother Martin, who we called ML because he and Daddy had the same name, our baby brother was born. His name was Alfred Daniel, but we called him A.D. after our grandfather. They called me Christine, and like 3 peas in one pod, we grew together. Our days and rooms were filled with adventure stories and tinker toys, with dolls and Monopoly and Chinese checkers. And although Daddy, who was an important minister, and Mother dear, who was known far and wide as a musician, often had work that took them away from home, our grandmother was always there to take care of us. I remember days sitting at her feet, and she and Aunt Ida filled us with grand memories of their childhood and read to us about the wonderful places in the world. And of course, my brothers and I had each other. We 3 stuck together, like the pages in a brand new book. And being normal young children, we were almost always up to something. Our best prank, oh my goodness, Dr. King having a prank. Remember? He's a kid too. He was just like you. So here it goes. Our best prank involved a fur piece that belonged to our grandmother. It looked almost alive with its tiny feet and little head and gleaming glass eyes. So every once in a while, in the waning light of evening, we tied that fur piece to a stick and hiding behind the hedge in front of our house, we would dangle it in front of unsuspecting passers-by. Boy, you could hear the screams of fright all across the neighborhood. What do you wonder? Then there was the time Mother dear decided that her children should all learn to play piano. I didn't mind too much, but ML and AD preferred being outside to being stuck inside with our piano teacher, Mr. Mann, who would rap your knuckles, that means hit, with a ruler, just for playing the wrong notes. Oh dear. Well, one morning, ML and AD decided to loosen the legs on the piano bench so we wouldn't have to practice. We didn't tell Mr. Mann, and when he sat, crash, down he went. What do you wonder? I have a few questions. wonder if they got in trouble. I wonder if they played piano again. But mostly, we were good, obedient children. And ML did learn to play a few songs on the piano. He even went off to sing with our mother a time or two. Given his love for singing and music, I'm sure he could have become a musician as our mother, had his life not called him down a different path. But that's just what his life did. My brothers and I grew up a long time ago, back in a time when certain places in our country had unfair laws that said it was right to keep the black people separate because our skin was darker, and our ancestors had been captured in far-off Africa and brought to America as slaves. Atlanta, Georgia, the city in which we were growing up, had those laws. Because of those laws, my family rarely went to the picture shows, which is like the movies, or visited Grant Park with its famous cyclorama, which would be like Great America or Disneyland. In fact, to this very day, I don't recall ever seeing my father on a streetcar because of those laws. A streetcar is like the trolleys in San Francisco. And the indignity that went with them, those laws. Daddy preferred keeping ML and AD and me close to home, where we'd be protected. We lived in a neighborhood in Atlanta that's now called Sweet Auburn. It was named for Auburn Avenue, the street that ran in front of our house. On our side of the street stood 2-story framed houses, similar to the ones we lived in, and this is the one they lived in. Across it crouched a line of 1-story houses, and a store owned by a white family. And today you could see these houses are still the same colors and look very similar, separate from the cars. When we were young, all children along Auburn Avenue played together, even the 2 boys whose parents owned the store. And since our family was a favorite gathering place, those boys played with us in our backyard. And ran with ML and AD to the firehouse on the corner where they watched the engines and the firemen. The thought of not playing with those kids because they were different, because they were white and we were black, never entered our minds. Well, one day, ML and AD went to get their playmates from across the street, just as they had done 100 times before, but they came home alone. The boys had told my brothers that they couldn't play together anymore because AD and ML were Negroes, and that was it. Shortly afterward, the family sold the store and moved away. We never saw or heard from them again. Looking back, I realized that it was only a matter of time before the generations of cruelty and injustice that Daddy and Mother Dear and Mama and Aunt Ida had been shielding us from finally broke through. But back then, it was a crashing blow that seemed to come out of nowhere. What do you wonder? How do you think they feel? How do you feel from hearing that? Why did white people treat colored people so mean? ML asked Mother Dear afterward. And with me and ML and AD standing in front of her, trying our best to understand, Mother Dear gave the reason behind it all. Her words explained the streetcars our family avoided and the white-only sign that kept us from off the elevator at City Hall. Her words told why there were parks and museums that black people could not visit, and why some restaurants refused to serve us, and why hotels wouldn't give us rooms, and why theaters would only allow us to watch their picture shows from the balcony. But her words gave us hope. She answered simply, because they don't understand that everyone is the same, but someday it will be better. And my brother ML looked up into our mother's face and said the words I remember to this day. He said, "Mother dear, one day I'm going to turn this world upside down." In the coming years, there would be other reminders of the cruel system called segregation that sought to keep Black people down. But it was Daddy who showed ML and AD and me how to speak out against hatred and bigotry and stand up for what's right. Daddy was the minister of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and after losing our playmates, when ML, AD, and I heard our father speaking from his pulpit, his words held new meaning. And Daddy practiced what he preached. He always stood up for himself when confronted with hatred and bigotry, and each day he shared his encounters at the dinner table. When a shoe salesman told Daddy and ML that he'd only serve them in the back of the store because they were Black, Daddy took ML somewhere else to buy new shoes. Another time, a police officer pulled Daddy over and called him boy. Daddy pointed to ML sitting next to him in the car and said, "This is a boy. I am a man. And until you call me one, I will not listen to you." These stories were as nourishing as food that was set before us. Years would pass, and many new lessons would be learned. There would be numerous speeches and marches and prizes, but my brother never forgot the example of our father or the promise that he had made to our mother. On the day his friends turned him away. And when he was much older, my brother ML dreamed a dream that turned the world upside down. The end. My Brother Martin, a story by his sister, Christine King Farris. What questions do you have? What do you wonder about Dr. King and his childhood?